Okay, so I just finished watching Hood Prince of Thieves. It's almost 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't take notes when I was watching this. It's not as campy as I remembered it, actually. It's a lot darker in certain ways than I remembered it being. It also tied in a lot of different of the ballads and the little stories in there. Like the first time we meet Marion, even though they're not fighting in the woods, she is dressed in armor and disguise and fights Robin, which is similar to the only ballad that we really have Marion in the Robin Hood classic tales. So it does take a lot of different mediums of Robin Hood. It adds a whole lot to it. Morgan Freeman's character as the more plays a larger role, and I think that is one thing that did a lot of work with his character. There were certain things that just wasn't necessary, like the emergency C-section, and it just that whole scene and subplot, if you want to call it that, was completely unnecessary. They'd already given the character a lot of time to grow and to show the differences in the cultures. One of my favorite jokes is actually early on in the movie, when they're just getting to England, because Morgan Freeman's character, Azim, has helped Robin escape the Middle East and return to England. And he has a life debt to Robin because Robin helped him escape from jail when they were still in the Middle East. So now the two of them are kind of companions, but Azim is Muslim, and he's in England, and it's time for his prayers, and he's looking around, and it's all cloudy. It's just gray skies, and he's like, where is the sun? Is there any light in this country? And he's asking Robin to tell him, which way's east, because he needs to do his prayers, and he has to make sure he does it in the right direction. And Robin has been teasing him a little bit about why Azim was in prison to start with, so it's just kind of funny, that little banter really early on in the movie. There's other little kind of cultural barbs and stuff here and there, and some of it works, and other bits not so much. The whole idea of a Muslim, a Moorish person, or Saracen becoming a companion of Robin Hood started from the BBC television program from the early 1980s or late 70s. And that character was actually, he was just supposed to be a one-off bad guy working just a minion for a bad guy that Robin Hood defeats in the pilot episode. But the actor who played the part was, he just got along with everybody, and the director and producers and everybody, they wanted to keep him on, and so somehow they decided to change the story then, so Robin killing him at the end, that they kind of duel and have a truce, and then slowly the Saracen character becomes an accepted member of Robin Hood's band. And that had changed the Robin Hood story a lot from then on. And while Prince of Thieves certainly doesn't have a lot in common with that BBC series, the idea of having a Saracen, or in the movie they call him a Moorish, be a part of his group, that came from there. I think it's safe to say, since there's no other source for that kind of thing. And it's an interesting idea, and it's one that's been used a little bit since then. a lot of people give Kevin Costner grief because he didn't even try to have a British accent, but honestly, I think one of the hokiest things of the movie is Morgan Freeman's accent. Maybe it would have been better. Like, I mean, Kevin Costner is a good actor. Morgan Freeman, of course, is a great actor and everything, and he's done a lot of roles, but I don't think that role was actually really good for Morgan Freeman. It didn't suit him, or rather, Morgan Freeman just didn't suit that role very well. Strangely enough, Guy Gisborne he's not even in the climax, which I don't know why, like what happened with him. I did fall asleep for like a short period of time, but I don't think the character got killed off while I fell asleep. I've been up since 6, so I'm tired. It's not just because the movie was boring or anything like that. I was tired. I almost thought, you know what? I don't think I'm going to make it through the night, but I tried to push myself through to watch the movie. And I'm glad I did, because there were a lot of things like I'd forgotten about the movie, but I don't know what happened to Guy Gisborne. But he wasn't in the climax at all. Prince John is not in the movie at all. Maid Marian is suddenly King Richard's cousin, and so Nottingham, who is not of noble blood, wants to marry her in order to have a claim to the throne. But there's a lot of historical problems with that. For one thing, King Richard did have an heir at the time. Actually, it was his nephew. I want to say Anthony of Burgundy, but that's not right. Arthur of Burgundy, I believe it was. See, Richard and John had 2 older brothers, and Richard's actually, he was actually the second or the third boy in the family, and John, being the baby, he was the one that lacked land. And so, but their eldest brother, who was originally supposed to inherit the throne, had a rebellion against the father, so he ended up dying a few years after his rebellion against his father. And the other brother, he also sided with the oldest, and he had some problems. I don't know if he died in combat or something else happened later. I know one of them died a jousting tournament after the rebellion. They made peace with their father. So the son, Arthur, of the eldest, was Richard's heir, and he made that appointment before he left for the Crusades. Also, there was another contender to the throne, a female niece. Yeah, a niece. I was almost thinking there was a female cousin, but no, it was a niece. And I believe the niece was also related, either Arthur's sister, or she was the daughter of one of the other older brothers. But whatever the case is, John actually kept her in captivity for most of her life. He didn't allow harm to come to her, but she spent almost her entire life as a prisoner, being noble and stuff. She had certain gifts and things sent to her. John had her taken care of, but because she was such a threat to his throne, he wasn't going to marry her off. He wasn't going to allow her from under his thumb. So she's very different from Maid Marian, and you can't try to tie Maid Marian to this historical female woman, but a lot of Robin Hood stories, they try to make Mary Marian of noble birth, and so sometimes they tie her to Richard. But the history of the family line and stuff like that is not done very well in this movie. I don't think they really cared about that. It's like they combined some of the stereotypes that people have in different films and adaptations of the Robin Hood stories. They combined the Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham character, and then they gave some attributes of the Sheriff of Nottingham character to the Guy Gisborne. And in some ways, the Guy Gisborne of this movie does seem to play a similar role to the Guy Gisborne from the BBC television series that I've already mentioned. They did keep a couple of other villains that appear in the Robin Hood tales, such as the priest, the bishop of, and I forgot the name of the place, but he actually does reoccur as someone that Robin has a vendetta with, and in this one, he's shown as an ally with Nottingham, but Maid Marian doesn't realize that he's such a horrible traitor until later, but Robin Hood finds out kind of fairly early on. And so the audience, of course, does, so I don't think that's really a spoiler. They have, Will Scarlet, and they maintained the Will Scarlet story that he's related to Robin, but they did change that a little bit. In the ballads and the short stories and plays and different things, and older novels, basically we hear of Will Scarlet, Will Scathlock, and Will Stuteley. And sometimes people say that these three names is actually just one person, or they'll put two people, so Will Scarlet or Scathlock, and then Will Stuteley as two characters. And other times they just combine them into one, or they just, tell the story of one of the characters and ignore the others. In this one, we kind of combine Scarlet and Scathlock together. And Will Scarlet in the ballads, he shows up actually just a few times, and he is the nephew or cousin of Robin. In this one, they changed the family relations, and some of how they meet and stuff. How they meet is a lot more like Robin Hood's meeting with Will Scathlock. Anyway, at first I wasn't liking Christian Slater's Will character because he just is kind of a twit and not very likable. But then in the last act, when you find out some stuff and the big reveals and things, it's like, oh, okay. He's not so bad, and he does redeem himself in some ways. Another thing I really liked about this movie is Robin Hood is not invincible. In a lot of stories, Robin Hood is shown as kind of like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon, those characters, those are science fiction characters, but they're shown as being almost invincible. Like, they always save the day, they do everything, and in a lot of television series or movies, the Robin Hood character, he's so charismatic, and he's always the one that saves everybody else. And in this movie, he does have, like, some of the boyish charm, but not a lot of it. And he does give those rousing speeches of, fighting for what's right and whatnot, and being courageous and blah, blah, blah. And some of those speeches are good. Some of them are just meh, whatever. so he still has some of those elements of that idolized hero, but he's not invincible. He is shown to be vulnerable, and in those cases we get to see the strengths of his companions. Now my one problem is usually Robin Hood's failures is opportunity for Morgan Freeman's character to save the day, and you know, that would be okay to a point. What bothers me is I would like to see Little John and Munch and some of the other characters to step up a little bit more. One thing that's kind of cool is they do have Maid Marian's Lady-in-Waiting is proven to be very brave and protective and cool, and Little John's wife plays a pretty decent role, and then there's a few other women in the village and stuff that may or may not have names. I miss Alan Adele. He's not in this movie at all, which is sad. Very sad. He's one of my favorites. But I kind of understand why he's not. And like I said, it was kind of interesting the way they took a lot of elements from different ballads, and they really mixed it up, though, in order to tell their story. And some of the changes kind of works, and some of the changes I'm not particularly fond of, but for the narrative that they went with, the changes worked. I guess there's certain things with the narrative I would have rather changed the narrative to fit the ballads. But on the other hand, if you're retelling a classic tale, you want to put in those familiar things in there without just rehashing everything that everybody's familiar with. So you gotta shake it up a little bit. And they did that pretty good in changing Robin's father's Robin and his father's background, and the opening scene, or one of the early on scenes, is when Robin's father dies, and the Sheriff of Nottingham is there, and they look like a Ku Klux Klan. It's not very historically accurate in costumes and dialogue, in just the nobility and the things that was going on politically at the time. It's not very historically accurate, but honestly, it's not as bad as Ridley Scott's Robin Hood. Like, I really hated Ridley Scott's Robin Hood. On one hand, I kind of liked his Maid Marian, but that's about the only aspect of Ridley Scott's that, with Russell Crowe, that was at all interesting. The rest of it was such garbage and annoying. And this one, yeah, Alan is missing, but that's okay, because we do have some other interesting characters, and they're shown a lot better, and they have actual arcs, and they do stuff, whereas the Ridley Scott one, they don't do really anything. They're just there to get drunk and to be bodies during fights and stuff, but as characters, they might as well be nameless, faceless, dummies walking around in the background. So it does hold up. While I was watching the movie, I looked up something because I was just kind of interested, and somebody mentioned that in their review, and I didn't get to finish reading their review, so I'll look at it in a little bit, but they said that Prince of Thieves in the 90s did to Robin Hood in action movies what Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins was for Batman superhero movies in the 2000s. And that makes sense, Robin Hood was usually very campy and very lighthearted, swashbuckling, and kind of action adventure. In this one, it is actually a lot darker, and there are some comedic things going on. Alan Rickman is playing the part of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he does such a great job. There's a few scenes where he's over the top, but there's other scenes where you really do get this character that is trying to be noble and fearsome and scary, but he doesn't have the charisma for the persona that he wants. That is, the character doesn't have the charisma that the character wants. The actor, Alan Rickman, is playing that role perfectly as somebody who wants to have a certain level of respect and be recognized as noble and charismatic, and he's not. And that works. It's a really interesting take on the Sheriff of Nottingham. But again, I think a lot of that has to do with there's no Prince John character, and so some of that feels more like what Prince John should have been, like Prince John being the youngest boy, overcompensating, trying to usurp his brother's throne. But John used a lot of political things going on in the background, more than just brute force. Historically speaking, there was a battle at Nottingham Castle, and that fight, though, John had gained some support from barons and other noblemen, and he had been spreading the rumor that his brother was dead, but in fact Richard had been a hostage, and he finally got their mother had finally raised enough money to pay for the ransom. And the high taxes was actually not John's fault, not at that point. Most of the high taxes and things like that was actually to pay for the king's ransom. So, and a lot of the financial problems that plagued John was due to the mess Richard had left things in. But John wasn't very strategic in battle, and he lost a lot of lands, and he did make a mess of things, and he was a very brutal person. In fact, even though Richard had made their nephew, Arthur of Brittany, his heir before he went on the Crusades, when he got back, and he landed at Sandwich, and then him and his entourage made their way to Nottingham, and they had kind of a scrimmage there, but finally John and his noblemen surrendered, and they made peace with Richard, and Richard actually forgave John, and they kind of made a peace treaty kind of between the two of them, and John did become his heir after that. But because John, after Richard died, and John became king later, then Arthur, he had some noblemen who wanted to place him on the throne and get rid of John. And so it's not proven, but I think the majority of historians do believe that John had Arthur killed in prison. It is a fact that John had Arthur in prison, but whether Arthur was killed in prison at the behest of John is not necessarily a documented fact. It's commonly believed to be true, though. So John was very cruel, and that is documented, his cruelty. And one thing you have to keep in mind when you read historical documents about John is because he had fallen out of favor with a lot of the noblemen and who writes history. The people who were writing history were particularly people of the clergy, and John had ticked them off for multiple reasons on multiple occasions, and so the clergy of the time were the ones that usually wrote history. They were the scribes, and so no, John is not painted in a very good light by the clergy. So the historians of his times, what we have documented, unless it's in letters from other people, It's going to be basically from the clergy and their notes of history and things like that. So, yeah, John does not come off looking very pretty. And no doubt, he earned a lot of the criticism towards him. But not necessarily that he was stupid. He was very cruel, and he wasn't very smart in military strategy. But in other ways, he was pretty good at manipulating people and maneuvering things to a point. It would seem if he was angry and he was acting rashly, then he screwed up his own best interests. So, anyway, I think that's like something I really missed in this Robin Hood story, is that they don't even bother having John, and the whole witch storyline. Her ending, she's afraid of the Sarson or the Moor because she has visions that he's going to kill her, and so of course that they have a showdown and stuff, but then there's a jump scare, and it just kind of ruins some of it, of the self-fulfilled prophecy, being so afraid of somebody killing you, then you try so hard to kill them first. And yeah, it just, the ending's a little jumbled up and messy. One of the cool things about the ending is there's like 3 different ballads of Robin Hood rescuing people from the gallows, and so that is like, you know, an arc that always has to happen in a movie or TV series. And a lot of times that tends to happen like in the latter part of the first act or somewhere in the second act, but in this one it's actually the third act. It's part of the climax. So that was kind of cool. Like, again, the placement and order of the classic tales is different in order to fit a different narrative. But that makes it a little more fresh, and it definitely makes it stand out. Like, you can watch a lot of Robin Hood movies, and Prince of Thieves is going to stand out. Not just because of the 80s cheese and costumes, but just the narrative as well. It's different. And I appreciate that. And I'm glad it wasn't too cheesy. It was funny. They did have this ongoing joke about the Sheriff of Nottingham. Again, it goes back to his pride and his vanity and desperately wanting to be taken seriously. And he has this statue made of himself. And early on in the movie, he gets a mark on his face from Robin. And so somebody comes along and marks the statue of the sheriff to match his new scar, and of course the sheriff's mad about that. And then the statue comes in a couple more times in the movie, and I just thought it was kind of funny. I thought that was a good like running joke, and it's a very visual joke, which is good because sometimes things are just words, it's dialogue, and I think this movie did a pretty good job of showing and not just telling. And there were a few things where they said, you know, it was done just through dialogue, and maybe this could have been handled better, but for the most part, I think most of the narrative is very visual and very good and very suited for being an audiovisual format. And, you know, I was expecting it to be a little more lighthearted and campy, and that's probably because I watched Men in Tights so much. when Prince of Thieves came out, we watched that a lot, and the Men in Tights came out, and we watched that a lot. And both of those movies have a special place in my family's hearts. Probably because my older brothers like those movies so much. And that's probably very telling. Like, my oldest brother loved Prince of Thieves, and my second older brother loved Men in Tights. So, it tells us maybe a lot about their personalities, and maybe Jay liked Men in Tights despite Scotty, I don't know. But, yeah, so it's probably past 5 o'clock now that I'm done talking. Sorry this got up so late, but of course those movies were long, and I can't imagine how my night would have gone if I did watch all 4 movies that I wanted to. So hopefully, sometime in the future, I'll get to watch Ridley Scott's Legend, and maybe I'll rewatch Willow. I remember my brother Scott watched Willow a lot when we were younger. And it was very popular, it seemed. So it's very disappointing. It's not like I didn't see it on Netflix or Hulu or anything, so it's kind of sad. But, oh well, I'll try to see them eventually. Alright, have a good night, guys. Or morning.